Hello, my name is Adriel Malario, and today I'm here to talk to you about our Spring 2023 Senior Design Project. My team members are Alec John Herald Joseph, Michael Anthony Ferrer, Jimena Puig, and Felix Rodriguez Jr. Our, our project's title is called WebChain, and as to WebChain's problem, or rather the problem it's aiming to solve, we aim to be tackling the problem involved with voting systems, or rather voting sites. What kind of problems do voting sites have? Well, a lot of online voting systems face many different types of threats, or rather accusations, such as hacking, fraud, tampering, the works. We hear it every election. I figured there'd be some familiarity with it. A lot of a lot of these issues end up leading to a lack of confidence, or rather a lack of faith within these types of systems. Due to this, or rather as a side of, a rather as some sort of side effect, we also have a lack of transparency. Because we don't really know what's going on in a lot of these voting systems, we also end up not being able to really see what's going on and make sure our vote counts. So as a result, that also pertains to another lack of confidence or lack of faith within the system, and the idea that your vote actually is counting. What would the solution be? Well, rather to integrate a voting system into a blockchain of sorts. So the purpose of our new system, our blockchain technology would aim to provide a secure and transparent voting site to users and people who want to host polls or ballots, and correct a lot of the problems that we see with a lot of online voting systems. We Blockchains end up giving a lot of transparency to user actions, meaning that a lot of user actions involving the blockchain will end up being recorded on there, and they can't be tampered with because of how blockchains work, or rather, blockchains blockchains usually need to perform some kind of validation to ensure that nothing in the chain previously has been tampered with. So that would so a lot of transparency that they provide ends up helping with that. There's decentralization, so no single person or no single entity is going to control the systems involved. Every every instance will have will have some form of control over the blockchain, allowing everyone to essentially audit and make sure that everything is correct and up to date on their end. Another bonus of decentralization is that users can run their own instance of the website, meet and host it on any device or any sort of environment that supports it. Meaning that anybody who wishes to host their own sort of instance of our voting system would be able to. To elaborate a little more on this, the type of people who'd be able to apply this software are anybody who'd use voting sites, or anybody who need to use a voting machine, or rather, anybody who essentially wants transparency within voting. You'd see a lot of people who want to demand who would essentially want to audit their own transactions and votes without having to rely on a third party. You see this a lot as we described earlier. There's a lot of faith that you have to put into a lot of these voting systems. So if the user ends up lacking faith, there's really no reason to use that sort of voting system as something reliable. So in response to this, a blockchain implementation to a voting site would end up creating the transparency and ability to audit. It would generate transparency, but also allow for an ability to audit user transactions or user actions, making it a lot easier to tell what's going on and make sure that everything is intact. Also, because uh, decentralization would also mean anyone would be able to host their own instances. So any company or group that wants to host a voting site or poll site would be able to. So the methodology involved with our meetings ended up revolving down to this. So our first sprint, we ended up meeting and coordinating with our team, or everyone within the team. We ended up making decisions about where we wanted to go with the direction of the project. This was where we decided where we wanted to essentially create a voting site hosted hosted over a blockchain, or integrating blockchain technology into it. This is where we made our GitHub repo to start off and essentially start our development as soon as we could. The second sprint ended up us trying to learn React, HTML, and CSS along with JavaScript. This is where we began working on the design of our system and how it was going to be implemented, being sure to have a vision of where we wanted to go down the road and make sure everything was correct. Our third sprint was just continuing our design and implementing some documentation as to how it would work. We'd have a Figma design for our CSS, make it a lot easier for us to streamline this process of developing a CSS page, and it allowed us to begin coding more of our front end. Which at the time we were trying to use React, but due to time constraints, we ended up having to get rid of that. During the fourth sprint, we ended up researching more on blockchain technology and how we'd implement more of it how our implementation would deepen from our research into the site. We also continued working on the front end with React at this time, and by the fifth sprint, this is where we ended up dropping React and having to rebuild the front end or the client with HTML and CSS. Due to the learning curve involved, or rather the learning curve that we were facing with React. This was also where the blockchain implementation ended up starting. This is where we used Node.js or JavaScript to implement it. During our sixth sprint, we created the database that we wanted to integrate with the blockchain using MySQL. We continued our front end, developing our front end client. And this is where we also began planning for the final sprint, getting all the documentation, posters, presentations, and videos ready. During the seventh sprint, it was more of a touch up on all the items that I just mentioned that'd be necessary for presenting this project here today. A lot of our user stories are essentially us going over what we'd want out of the project, both as a developer and as a user. How we'd want everything to play out on either team. The software and hardware that we used were Figma, essentially to create our CSS, GitHub in order to organize the repo, Visual Studio Code as our integrated development environment, both for the front end, blockchain, and the back end. Our front end was written in HTML and CSS, but originally was going to be made in React. And the back end and blockchain were both written in JavaScript. This is a little more of how our CSS looks. This is the UML diagrams and package diagrams of how our system would play out. This is our deployment diagram and our entity relationship diagram. And here are some use cases plotted out in another diagram. And a sequence And this is a sequence diagram that essentially shows the timing of processes and what methods would play out after each action. Some more front end screenshots and some screenshots of our back end. Here are some test cases that we had in mind when designing everything. And in conclusion, we've shown you that the voting website that we've designed with the blockchain, we've laid out groundwork for expansion on our project for future teams, especially when it comes to scaling and total completion. We've came up with a process and shown how we've designed, or rather intended to design, our voting website's processes and how the process will play out. And we started on our database for storing the blockchain itself, but still need to complete it due to time constraints. Thank you for your time, and I hope you've enjoyed our presentation.